Thunder cracked across the Montana sky as Ruby Fletcher struggled to secure the shutters of her isolated cabin against the raging storm of 1876. The 22-year-old had never seen such violence in the heavens, not in all her years since moving west after the war. Lightning illuminated the rolling prairie surrounding her small homestead in brilliant flashes, revealing the twisted faces of wind-tortured pines that stood sentinel over her vulnerable plot of land. Ruby had inherited the cabin from her uncle just 6 months prior, her only remaining family after the fever took her parents back in Ohio. Life as a woman alone in Montana territory wasn't what she had envisioned for herself, but determination ran in her blood as surely as the creek ran behind her property. With calloused hands that belied her fine features, she fought to bar the door against the howling wind that seemed determined to claim her home. 10 miles away, Beau Caldwell urged his exhausted paint horse through the downpour, head bent against the deluge. At 26, he had seen his share of Montana storms, but tonight's tempest carried an unusual fury. Lightning split the darkness with such frequency that it nearly provided continuous illumination of the treacherous trail. Beau was returning from delivering a herd to the railroad at Fort Benton, his pockets heavy with payment, his body weary from weeks in the saddle. "Easy, Domino," he soothed as thunder boomed directly overhead, causing the horse to sidestep nervously. "We'll find shelter soon enough." As if in answer to his words, lightning slashed across the sky, illuminating a small cabin in the distance. Beau had heard that old man Fletcher's niece had taken over his claim after his passing, though he'd never had occasion to meet her. Right now, that cabin represented the only hope of shelter between him and the 16 miles remaining to his own ranch. Inside the cabin, Ruby froze at the sound of splitting wood above her. The rafters groaned as if in mortal agony, and the smell of smoke reached her nostrils a moment before a deafening crack split the air. Lightning had found its mark. "Dear God," she whispered, watching in horror as flames began to lick along the ceiling beams. The tinder dry wood of the roof, despite the rain soaking it from above, caught quickly where the lightning had entered. Ruby grabbed for the bucket near the hearth, but even as she did, a section of burning thatch fell, blocking her path to the door. Heat scorched her face as she stumbled backward, searching frantically for another escape route. Beau was nearly to the cabin when he saw the flash strike it directly. Without hesitation, he dug his heels into Domino's flanks, urging the tired horse to a gallop. The smell of burning wood reached him even through the rain, and he could see the orange glow beginning to spread across the cabin's roof. "Hello," he shouted, jumping from his horse when he reached the yard. "Anyone inside?" Ruby's cough answered him before her words could. "Help, I'm trapped." Beau didn't hesitate. He pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth and kicked at the door, which gave way under his boot. Smoke billowed out to greet him, but he pushed forward, crouching low where the air remained clearer. "Where are you?" he called. "Here." Ruby's voice came from the corner, where she had pressed herself against the wall to escape falling debris. Beau moved toward her voice, navigating around burning pieces of roof and furniture. Through the smoke, he made out the figure of a young woman, her face smudged with soot, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm going to get you out," he said, reaching her side. "Can you walk?" Ruby nodded, but as she tried to step forward, a beam crashed down barely a foot away, sending sparks flying. She cried out, falling back against the wall. Without further deliberation, Beau swept her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, despite the sturdy work clothes she wore. Her arms went instinctively around his neck as he turned and made for the door, his broad shoulders shielding her from the worst of the falling embers. The roof gave an ominous groan above them. Beau quickened his pace, lungs burning with the effort of not inhaling too deeply. A support beam crashed behind them as he carried Ruby through the doorway and into the rain-soaked night. He didn't stop until they were a safe distance from the cabin, the cold rain a blessed relief after the inferno. Only then did he set Ruby carefully on her feet, though his hands remained at her waist to steady her as she coughed the smoke from her lungs. "Are you hurt?" he asked, studying her in the light cast by her burning home. Ruby shook her head, pushing wet strands of copper hair from her face. "No, thanks to you." Her voice was hoarse from the smoke. "You saved my life, Mr. Caldwell, Beau Caldwell." He removed his hat, rain immediately plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "I was passing by when I saw the lightning strike." Ruby turned to look at the cabin, watching as flames consumed what had become her only home. Everything she owned in the world was in that cabin: her mother's Bible, her father's pocket watch, the quilt her grandmother had made. Tears mingled with the rain on her cheeks. "It's all gone," she whispered, Beau's heart twisted at the desolation in her voice. "What's your name, Miss Ruby Fletcher?" She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware she was soaked to the skin and shivering. "My Uncle Joseph left me this place when he passed." "Old Joe Fletcher," Beau nodded in recognition. "He was a good man, had the best water rights in the county." He glanced back at the burning cabin. "I'm sorry about your home." A particularly violent gust of wind fanned the flames higher, and Ruby swayed on her feet. Beau caught her elbow to steady her. "You need shelter and dry clothes," he said, decision made. "My ranch is too far in this weather. The Wilcox place is just 3 miles east. Sarah Wilcox will have something you can wear." Ruby looked up at the stranger who had pulled her from the flames, a tall man with kind eyes and a strong jaw darkened by several days' stubble. In any other circumstances, she might have hesitated to ride off into the night with a man she didn't know, but circumstances being what they were. "I don't have much choice, do I?" she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm afraid not, Miss Fletcher." Beau gestured toward his horse, who stood patiently despite the continuing storm. "Domino here is tired, but he can carry us both to the Wilcox place." Ruby nodded, allowing Beau to help her onto the horse before he swung up behind her. The solid warmth of his chest against her back provided some relief from the chill that had settled into her bones. As Beau urged Domino forward, Ruby cast one last glance at her burning home, watching as the flames reached skyward to meet the storm. "Everything I own," she murmured. Beau's voice was gentle near her ear. "You're alive, Miss Fletcher. Everything else can be replaced." As they rode through the night, the storm gradually began to abate, as if satisfied with the destruction it had wrought. Ruby, exhausted by her ordeal, found herself leaning back against Beau's solid form, her eyes growing heavy despite the precariousness of her situation. Beau felt the moment she relaxed against him and adjusted his hold to keep her secure. There was something about this woman that stirred his protective instincts, perhaps the quiet dignity with which she faced the loss of everything she owned, or the fact that she was out here alone, trying to make a life for herself in this unforgiving territory. By the time they reached the Wilcox homestead, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. Lights still burned in the windows despite the late hour, a welcome sight to the weary travelers. "Henry, Sarah," Beau called as they approached. "It's Beau Caldwell, I need help." The door opened almost immediately, revealing Henry Wilcox with a shotgun at the ready. Upon recognizing Beau, he lowered the weapon. "Caldwell, what in tarnation are you doing out on a night like this?" "Lightning struck Miss Fletcher's cabin," Beau explained, dismounting and reaching up to help Ruby down. "The place went up like kindling. She's lost everything." Sarah Wilcox appeared behind her husband, her gray hair in a loose braid for sleep. Her eyes widened at the sight of Ruby's bedraggled state. "Good heavens, child, come inside this instant." The next hour passed in a blur for Ruby. Sarah fussed over her like a mother hen, providing dry clothes, hot tea, and a seat by the fire. Henry and Beau spoke in low voices near the door, discussing the practicalities of her situation. "She can stay with us as long as she needs," Sarah assured Beau, patting Ruby's hand. "Poor child, all alone out there." Ruby roused herself from her daze. "I don't want to impose nonsense," Sarah interrupted. "It's what neighbors do. You rest now. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next." Beau approached, crouching down beside Ruby's chair. "I need to get on home, Miss Fletcher. My ranch hands will be worried if I don't show up by morning, but I'll come back tomorrow to see how you're faring." Ruby met his gaze, gratitude welling up inside her. Mr. Caldwell, I don't know how to thank you properly if you hadn't been passing by. Then someone else would have helped, he said firmly, though they both knew how unlikely that was given the remote location of her cabin. The important thing is you're safe. Yes, Ruby agreed softly. Thanks to you. Beau stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. Get some rest, Miss Fletcher. Things often look brighter in the morning. As he turned to go, Ruby found herself wishing he could stay, this stranger who had carried her through flames to safety. But she said nothing, merely nodding as Sarah showed him to the door. I'll be back tomorrow, Beau promised again before disappearing into the night. Ruby stared after him long after the door had closed, wondering what tomorrow would bring now that her fragile new life had quite literally gone up in flames. The morning dawned clear and calm, as if the previous night's tempest had never occurred. Ruby woke disoriented in an unfamiliar bed, the events of the night rushing back as soon as she opened her eyes. She dressed quickly in the clothes. Sarah had provided a simple calico dress that was slightly too large for her frame, and made her way to the kitchen where she found Sarah already preparing breakfast. There you are, child, Sarah greeted her warmly. I was beginning to think you might sleep the day away, not that anyone would blame you after what you've been through. What time is it? Ruby asked, embarrassed at the thought of sleeping late while others worked. Just past 7, Sarah assured her. Henry's already gone to look at what's left of your place. He took a wagon in case there's anything to salvage. Ruby's heart sank at the reminder. That's very kind of him, but I doubt there's much left. Sarah squeezed her shoulder sympathetically. You'd be surprised what survives. Why, when the Miller place burned down 3 years back, Mary's wedding china came through without so much as a crack. Ruby managed a small smile at Sarah's attempt to cheer her. I hope you'll let me help with the chores while I'm here. I wouldn't feel right just sitting idle. We'll see about that, Sarah replied, setting a plate of biscuits on the table. First, you need to eat and regain your strength. Ruby had just finished her breakfast when the sound of hoofbeats announced a visitor. Her pulse quickened inexplicably as Beau Caldwell's tall figure appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. Morning, Mrs. Wilcox, Miss Fletcher, he greeted them. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Sarah assured him. Have you eaten? There's plenty. Beau shook his head. Thank you, but I broke my fast at home. I came to see how Miss Fletcher is doing and to offer some assistance. Ruby met his gaze. In the clear light of day, she could see that his eyes were a deep blue, crinkled at the corners from squinting into the sun. His dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar, and his face, now clean-shaven, revealed a strong jawline. I'm well, Mr. Caldwell, she answered. Thanks to you. Henry's gone to check what's left of her place, Sarah explained, pouring coffee for Beau despite his protest that he'd already eaten. I was heading there myself, Beau said. Thought I might be of some help. Ruby stood, smoothing the borrowed dress. I should go too, I need to see it. Sarah looked as if she might object, but something in Ruby's expression must have conveyed her determination. Very well, she sighed, but take my shawl. It may be summer, but the morning still has a chill. Beau helped Ruby onto his horse, then mounted behind her as they had ridden the night before. As they set off toward her property, Ruby found herself acutely aware of his proximity, of the strength in the arms that loosely encircled her to hold the reins. Did you get any sleep? He asked after they had ridden in silence for a while. Some, she admitted. Though I kept seeing the flames whenever I closed my eyes. Beau nodded, understanding in his voice. That'll fade with time. Have you seen many fires, Mr. Caldwell? More than I'd like, he confirmed. Nature's way of clearing out the old to make way for the new, my father used to say, though that's small comfort when it's your home burning. Indeed. Ruby fell silent again, considering the man behind her. You have a ranch nearby, about 16 miles southwest, Beau replied. Nothing too grand, but it's mine. 200 head of cattle, good grazing land, and a creek that runs year-round. You live there alone. With my ranch hands 3 good men who have been with me since I started. My parents passed on 5 years back, left me enough to buy the land and get started. I'm sorry about your parents, Ruby said softly, as I am about your loss, Beau returned. Henry mentioned your uncle left you the place. Did you have family back east? Not anymore. Ruby stared at the horizon. My parents died of fever 3 years ago. Uncle Joseph was my father's brother. He wrote offering me a place here after they passed, but by the time I arrived, he was already sick with consumption. He lasted only a month after I got here. Beau was silent for a moment, processing her story. So you've been managing the homestead alone for 6 months, Ruby supplied. It's not been easy, but I was making progress. The garden was starting to produce, and I had 5 chickens and a milk cow. Her voice caught as she remembered her animals. Oh, the animals, do you think they? We'll find out soon enough, Beau said gently. Livestock usually has good sense about fire. They probably broke out and ran. They crested a small rise, and Ruby's property came into view. Where her cabin had stood was now a blackened rectangle of ash and debris. Henry Wilcox's wagon was parked nearby, and he was sifting through the ruins with a long stick. Ruby's breath caught in her throat at the sight. Despite knowing what to expect, the reality of her loss hit her anew. Beau's arm tightened briefly around her waist in silent support before he urged Domino forward. Henry looked up as they approached. "Morning, Beau, Miss Fletcher." His expression was grim. "I'm afraid there's not much left. The fire took just about everything." Ruby dismounted with Beau's help, her legs unsteady as she approached what remained of her home. The stone chimney still stood, blackened by smoke but intact. Everything else was gone. "My animals?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Found the cow grazing about a quarter mile from here," Henry reported. "No sign of the chickens yet, but they might have scattered." It was a small mercy, but Ruby clung to it. At least Buttercup survived. She moved carefully around the perimeter of the ruins, eyes scanning for anything recognizable. Near where the back door had been, she spotted something glinting in the ash. Kneeling, she carefully brushed away the debris to reveal her father's pocket watch. The glass was cracked and the case scorched, but it was intact. Tears sprang to her eyes as she cradled it in her palm. "It was my father's," she explained as Beau came to stand beside her, "and his father's before him." Beau nodded, understanding the significance. A good sign, finding something so important. They spent the next hour carefully sifting through the ruins. By the end, Ruby had recovered the pocket watch, a singed Bible with its leather cover partially melted but many pages intact, a cast iron skillet, and a small tin box containing a brooch that had belonged to her mother. Everything else, clothes, furniture, tools, was gone. "It's not much to start over with," Ruby sighed, looking at the pitifully small collection of salvaged items in the wagon. "You'd be surprised what folks can build from less," Henry assured her, "and the community will help. That's how it works out here." Beau had been examining the land around the cabin, walking the perimeter of what had been her small farm. Now he returned to where Ruby stood beside the wagon. "The well is intact," he reported, "and the property still has the best water rights in the county, like I said last night." "That's worth something?" Ruby nodded absently, her mind overwhelmed by the enormity of what faced her. Even with help, rebuilding would take time and resources she didn't have. Winter would come before a new cabin could be completed. "I don't know what to do," she admitted quietly, more to herself than to the men. Beau studied her for a long moment, admiring the strength it must have taken for her to survive alone these past months. "You have options, Miss Fletcher. The Wilcoxes would let you stay on, I'm sure." Or he hesitated, then plunged ahead. "My ranch has a small cabin that my foreman used before he married and built his own place. It's been sitting empty for nearly a year. You'd be welcome to it until you decide what you want to do." Henry's eyebrows rose at the offer, but he said nothing, leaving the decision to Ruby. Ruby looked up at Beau, surprise evident in her expression. "That's very generous, Mr. Caldwell, but I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," Beau interrupted. "The cabin's just sitting there empty, and I have plenty of work that needs doing if you're worried about earning your keep. My cook, Mrs. Abernathy, would welcome another woman around the place." The offer was tempting. The alternative was to stay with the Wilcoxes indefinitely, or perhaps try to find work in town, miles away from the land that was now her only asset. I would need to tend to my property, she said cautiously, make plans for rebuilding. Of course, Beau agreed readily. My ranch is close enough that you could ride over regularly to check on things, and I'd be happy to help with the rebuilding when you're ready. Henry cleared his throat. It's a fair offer, Miss Fletcher. Beau's a good man and his place is well run. Sarah and I would be happy to have you stay with us, but a young woman needs her independence. Ruby considered her limited options. She hardly knew Beau Caldwell, but he had saved her life, and there was something in his steady gaze that inspired trust. The prospect of having her own space, even temporarily, was appealing after months of hard-won independence. Very well, Mr. Caldwell, she decided. I accept your kind offer, at least until I can make other arrangements. Relief flickered across Beau's features. Good. We can collect your cow and head to the ranch today if you're amenable. Mrs. Abernathy will have the cabin ready by evening. I should return to the Wilcox home first, Ruby insisted, to thank Sarah properly and collect the few things she loaned me. Of course, Beau agreed. Henry, would you mind taking Miss Fletcher back to your place? I'll round up her cow and meet you there. With the plans made, Ruby climbed into Henry's wagon for the journey back to the Wilcox homestead. As they pulled away, she glanced back to see Beau already moving efficiently around what remained of her property, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning sky. Despite everything, a small spark of hope kindled in her chest. Perhaps this wasn't the end of her dreams, but merely an unexpected detour. Sarah Wilcox was predictably distressed to hear that Ruby would be leaving so soon. Are you certain this is wise, dear? She asked as she helped Ruby gather the few borrowed items. You hardly know Mr. Caldwell. I know he saved my life, Ruby replied simply. And his offer makes practical sense. I need a place to stay while I decide what to do about my property. Sarah sighed, relenting. He is a good man, I'll grant you that. Built that ranch up from almost nothing after his folks passed. Never heard a whisper of scandal about him, which is saying something in these parts. Ruby felt a flush creep up her neck at the implication. I'll be staying in a separate cabin, Mrs. Wilcox. This is merely a practical arrangement. Of course, dear, Sarah agreed, though her knowing smile suggested she had ideas of her own about where such practical arrangements might lead. Just remember that a woman alone has to be careful of her reputation. By the time Beau arrived with Buttercup trailing behind his horse, Ruby had packed her meager belongings, the salvaged items from the fire, and a small bundle of necessities that Sarah insisted she take. The journey to the Caldwell ranch took most of the afternoon, with Beau leading the way and Ruby following on a gentle mare borrowed from the Wilcoxes. Buttercup plodded along behind them, occasionally stopping to graze until Beau's patient coaxing got her moving again. As they rode, Beau pointed out landmarks and boundaries, giving Ruby a sense of the territory. His land was impressive rolling grasslands dotted with stands of pine and bisected by a clear, rushing creek. This is all yours, Ruby asked, unable to hide her admiration. Beau nodded, a hint of pride in his voice. Every acre. My father taught me that land is the only thing worth having. It's the only thing they're not making any more of. A wise man, Ruby observed. He was, Beau agreed. Would have liked you, I think. He admired grit, and anyone who can manage a homestead alone for 6 months has that in spades. Ruby felt a warmth spread through her at his words. It had been a long time since anyone had recognized the strength it took to survive as she had. The main house of the Caldwell ranch came into view as they rounded a bend in the trail, a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and a large barn stood a short distance away. It was far more impressive than Ruby had expected. You said your ranch wasn't grand, she remarked. That looks plenty grand to me, Beau chuckled. Compared to some of the spreads further south, it's modest, but it suits me. They were met in the yard by an older woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her ample figure encased in a practical work dress and apron. Mrs. Abernathy, Beau called in greeting. This is Miss Ruby Fletcher, who I told you about this morning, Mrs. Abernathy's stern countenance softened as she took in Ruby's tired appearance. "You poor thing, Mr. Caldwell told us what happened. The cabin's all ready for you, fresh linens, stove lit, and a pot of stew keeping warm." "Thank you," Ruby said sincerely. "I appreciate your kindness." "Think nothing of it," Mrs. Abernathy dismissed with a wave of her hand. "It's good to have another woman around. These men would live like savages if I weren't here to civilize them." Beau rolled his eyes good-naturedly at his cook's familiar complaint. "We manage well enough, Mrs. A. Now, if you'll show Miss Fletcher to the cabin, I'll see to the animals." "This way, dear," Mrs. Abernathy gestured for Ruby to follow. "It's not far, just beyond that stand of cottonwoods. Cozy little place. Been sitting empty since Tom married and moved to his own homestead last year." The cabin proved to be a pleasant surprise, a solid, well-built structure with one main room containing a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. A colorful quilt brightened the simple furnishings, and curtains framed the 2 small windows. It was basic but clean and welcoming. "It's lovely," Ruby said, genuine appreciation in her voice. "After losing everything, even these simple comforts seemed like luxury." "Glad you think so," Mrs. Abernathy replied. "Bathroom's out back, I'm afraid, but there's a washstand inside and I've left a pitcher of hot water for you. You must be wanting to freshen up after your ordeal." Ruby couldn't deny it. "That would be wonderful." "I'll leave you to it then. Come up to the main house when you're ready for supper." "We eat at 6 sharp." With that, Mrs. Abernathy departed, leaving Ruby alone in her new temporary home. Ruby sank onto the edge of the bed, sudden exhaustion washing over her as the events of the past 24 hours caught up with her. She had lost her home, nearly lost her life, and now found herself dependent on the kindness of a man she barely knew. It was overwhelming. Yet as she looked around the snug cabin, a sense of peace gradually replaced her anxiety. She was alive. She had a roof over her head. And she still owned her land. Many had started with less. With renewed determination, Ruby rose and poured water into the basin to wash away the lingering scent of smoke that seemed to cling to her skin. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same resilience that had carried her this far. At precisely 6 o'clock, Ruby made her way to the main house, her hair neatly braided and her borrowed dress as presentable as she could make it. She found the household assembled in a spacious dining room, Beau at the head of the table, Mrs. Abernathy bustling about with serving dishes, and 3 men who must be the ranch hands Beau had mentioned. Beau rose when she entered, the others following his lead. "Miss Fletcher, allow me to introduce my men. This is Jim Hayes, my foreman." A weathered man of about 40 nodded respectfully. "Madam," and the Peterson brothers, Luke and Matthew, 2 younger men, clearly siblings with the same sandy hair and lanky build, offered shy greetings. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Ruby Fletcher, who will be staying in the foreman's cabin for a while. I expect you all to show her every courtesy." "Of course, boss," Jim assured him, pulling out a chair for Ruby beside Beau's place at the table. The meal was simple but delicious: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, with the men discussing the day's work and plans for the coming week. Ruby was struck by the easy camaraderie between Beau and his employees, so different from the rigid hierarchies she had observed on other ranches. "Miss Fletcher," Jim addressed her as they were finishing dessert, "the boss tells us you lost everything in the fire. The boys and I were thinking we might ride over on our next day off, see about clearing the site for rebuilding." Ruby was touched by the offer. "That's very kind, Mr. Hayes, but I wouldn't want to impose on your free time." "No imposition," Luke Peterson assured her earnestly. "Neighbors help neighbors out here." "That's right," Matthew added. "Besides, it won't take long with 4 of us working." Beau watched the exchange with approval. "It's settled then, Sunday after church, weather permitting." After the meal, Beau walked Ruby back to her cabin, carrying a lantern to light their way in the gathering dusk. Crickets chirped in the tall grass, and the evening air was sweet with the scent of wild sage. "Your men seem like good people," Ruby commented as they walked. "The best," Beau agreed. "Jim's been with me since I started. The Peterson boys came on 2 years ago when their family's farm failed." Good workers, all of them. And Mrs. Abernathy, Beau chuckled, rules us all with an iron fist. She was our housekeeper when my parents were alive. Stayed on after they passed, said someone needed to make sure I didn't starve. They reached the cabin and Beau hesitated on the small porch. Is there anything else you need tonight? Ruby shook her head. You and your household have been more than generous, Mr. Caldwell. Beau, he corrected gently. If you're going to be staying on my property, I think we can dispense with formalities. Ruby smiled. Beau then, and you must call me Ruby. Ruby, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. It suits you. An unexpected flutter stirred in Ruby's chest at the way he said her name. She quickly attributed it to exhaustion and the emotional toll of recent events. Well, good night, she said, perhaps a bit too brightly, and thank you again for everything. Good night, Ruby, Beau replied, tipping his hat before turning to walk back to the main house. Ruby watched him go, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of her lantern light. Then she entered the cabin, closing the door firmly behind her. As she prepared for bed, she couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday, she had been independent, if struggling. Today, she was essentially homeless, reliant on the charity of a man who was still largely a stranger. Yet as she slipped beneath the quilt on the narrow bed, Ruby found herself feeling unexpectedly hopeful. Beau Caldwell might be a stranger, but he was a stranger who had carried her through flames without hesitation, who had offered shelter without expectation, and who looked at her not with pity but with respect. Perhaps, she thought as sleep claimed her, there were worse fates than finding oneself in such hands. The next few days established a routine of sorts. Ruby insisted on making herself useful, helping Mrs. Abernathy with cooking and household tasks each morning. In the afternoons, she often rode to her property with one of the ranch hands as escort, gradually clearing small debris and planning for eventual rebuilding. On her fourth day at the Caldwell Ranch, Ruby was kneading bread dough in the kitchen when Beau appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. I'm riding into town for supplies, he announced. Thought you might want to come along. You could order some things for yourself, clothes and such. Ruby paused, flour dusting her hands and forearms. The idea of new clothes was tempting. She had been making do with the few items Sarah Wilcox had given her, washing them each night and wearing them again the next day. I don't have much money, she admitted. Just what was in the tin box we salvaged, about $20. Beau waved away her concern. Consider it an advance. You're working hard enough around here to earn your keep and then some. Mrs. Abernathy emerged from the pantry in time to hear his offer. Go on, girl, she urged. I can finish the bread. You need proper things of your own. Ruby hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. Thank you. I'll just wash up and be ready in a few minutes. Half an hour later, they were on the trail to Silver Creek, the nearest town of any size. It was a pleasant day for a ride, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and prairie grass. Ruby found herself relaxing in Beau's company, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed everything from cattle breeding to favorite books. I wouldn't have taken you for a reader of poetry, Ruby remarked when Beau mentioned his fondness for Wordsworth. He grinned, a hint of self-consciousness in his expression. My mother's influence. She was determined I would be a gentleman as well as a rancher. Made me read poetry and history alongside learning to rope and ride. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, Beau agreed, a shadow of old grief crossing his features. Would have been pleased to see what the ranch has become. My father, too. I think they would be proud, Ruby said softly. You've built something substantial here. Beau glanced at her, surprise and appreciation in his gaze. Thank you for saying so. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Ruby found herself studying Beau's profile surreptitiously, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hat sat at a slight angle on his dark hair, the quiet confidence in his posture as he rode. She couldn't deny he was an attractive man, but it was his kindness that drew her most. Silver Creek proved to be larger than Ruby had expected, a proper town with several streets of businesses. including a general store, a dress shop, a bank, and even a small hotel. It was busy for a weekday, with wagons and riders moving along the main street and pedestrians navigating the wooden sidewalks. Market day, Beau explained as they hitched their horses outside the general store. Folks come in from miles around to trade and socialize. Inside the store, Ruby felt suddenly self-conscious in her borrowed dress as several curious glances came her way. Beau seemed to sense her discomfort. "Mrs. Miller," he called to the shopkeeper's wife, a plump, friendly-looking woman arranging fabric on a shelf. "This is Miss Ruby Fletcher. She lost her home in the lightning storm last week and is in need of some essentials." Mrs. Miller's expression immediately softened with sympathy. "You poor dear, I heard about that from the Wilcoxes. Such a terrible thing. Come with me and we'll get you fixed up right away." For the next hour, Ruby selected basic necessities: 2 everyday dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, toiletries, and a few personal items. Beau wandered the store, consulting his own list of supplies, occasionally offering an opinion when asked, but otherwise giving Ruby privacy for her selections. At the counter, Ruby tried to keep a careful tally of her purchases, mindful of her limited funds. Mrs. Miller totaled everything, then looked to Beau. "Shall I put this on your account, Mr. Caldwell?" Before Ruby could protest, Beau nodded. "Yes, please, and add these items as well." He indicated his own selections: tools, ammunition, coffee, and several other ranch necessities. "Beau," Ruby said quietly, "I can't let you pay for my things." "Consider it part of your wages," he replied just as quietly. "You're working hard at the ranch. This is merely practical." Ruby wanted to argue further but was conscious of Mrs. Miller's interested observation. Instead, she simply said, "I'll repay you." "We'll discuss it later," Beau conceded, clearly to end the conversation in public. Their next stop was the bank, where Beau needed to deposit some funds. As they entered, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit looked up from speaking with the teller and smiled broadly. "Caldwell, just the man I wanted to see." Beau's expression remained polite but noticeably cooled. "Judge Richardson, what brings you to Silver Creek?" "Business, my boy, always business." The judge's gaze shifted to Ruby, his eyes taking in her simple dress with a scrutiny that made her uncomfortable. "And who is this lovely young lady?" Beau's stance shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly placing himself between Ruby and the older man. "Miss Ruby Fletcher. Ruby, this is Judge William Richardson." "A pleasure, my dear," Richardson said, taking Ruby's reluctantly offered hand and holding it a moment longer than necessary. "Fletcher, wasn't there a Fletcher place struck by lightning recently?" "My cabin," Ruby confirmed. "I lost everything. How unfortunate." Richardson's sympathetic tone seemed practiced rather than genuine. "And where are you staying now?" Before Ruby could answer, Beau intervened. "Miss Fletcher is temporarily residing in the foreman's cabin at my ranch while she makes arrangements to rebuild." Something calculating flickered in Richardson's eyes. "Is that so? How very neighborly of you, Caldwell." Ruby didn't miss the insinuation in his tone, nor the way Beau's jaw tightened in response. "If you'll excuse us, Judge," Beau said stiffly, "we have more errands to complete before heading back." Of course. Richardson stepped aside, but his gaze lingered on Ruby. "Miss Fletcher, should you find yourself in need of more suitable accommodations, my wife and I have a large home in town with several spare rooms. A young lady might find town life more comfortable than a bachelor's ranch." "Thank you, but I'm quite comfortable with my current arrangement," Ruby replied, her tone cooler than before. Outside the bank, Beau's expression was thunderous as they walked toward their next destination. "I apologize for Richardson," he said. "The man has a talent for unpleasant insinuations." "He seemed to take a particular interest in me," Ruby observed, Beau's mouth set in a grim line. "Richardson takes an interest in anything he thinks might benefit him. He's been trying to buy up land all through this part of the territory, yours included, I'd wager." "Mine, but why would he want my small homestead?" "Water rights," Beau explained. "Your uncle secured some of the best in the county. Richardson knows their value. He's been trying to buy my creek rights for years." Ruby considered this new information as they continued their errands. By the time they started the journey back to the ranch, her mind was spinning with implications. "If my land is valuable because of the water rights," she said as they rode, "perhaps I should sell. It would give me the means to start fresh somewhere else." Beau looked sharply at her. "You're considering selling to Richardson, not necessarily to him specifically," Ruby clarified. "But rebuilding will be expensive and difficult. Selling might be the practical choice." "It would be a mistake," Beau said firmly. "Once you sell, those rights are gone forever. Land like yours is a legacy, something to build on, to pass down." Ruby bristled slightly at his tone. "I appreciate your concern, but the decision is mine to make." Beau's expression softened. "Of course it is. I'm sorry if I overstepped. It's just I've seen what happens when folks sell to men like Richardson. They rarely get fair value and they often regret it later." His sincerity was evident and Ruby felt her irritation fade. "I haven't decided anything yet. There's time to consider all options." "That's all I ask," Beau said, relief evident in his voice. "That you take time to consider carefully before making any decisions." As they rode on, Ruby found herself studying Beau with new interest. His concern for her property rights seemed genuinely altruistic, born of principle rather than personal gain. It was a quality she had rarely encountered in men of her acquaintance. They were within sight of the ranch when Beau suddenly reined his horse to a stop, his expression alert. Ruby followed his gaze to where a plume of dust rose from the direction of the main house. "Riders," Beau said tersely. "Coming fast, something's wrong." He urged his horse forward at a gallop, and Ruby followed, her heart pounding with sudden anxiety. As they approached the ranch yard, she saw Jim Hayes riding to meet them, his expression grim. "What is it?" Beau called as they drew near. "Fire over at the Carson place," Jim reported. "Message just came. They're asking for all hands who can be spared." Beau's face set in determined lines. "Get the boys, water barrels in the wagon. We'll head out immediately." Jim nodded and wheeled his horse back toward the barn. Beau turned to Ruby. "The Carsons are about 5 miles east." "Good family, I need to help." His eyes searched her face. "Will you be all right here?" Ruby straightened in her saddle. "I'm coming with you." "Ruby, I know fire," she interrupted, "and I know what it means to need help. I'm coming." For a moment, Beau looked as if he might argue. Then he nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "Stay close to me. These situations can get dangerous quickly." Within 20 minutes, they were on the road east, Beau and his men on horseback, Luke driving the wagon loaded with water barrels and tools. Ruby rode beside Beau, her borrowed horse keeping pace easily. The smoke was visible from 2 miles away, an ominous dark column rising against the blue sky. As they drew closer, Ruby could see that it was not a house burning but a large barn. Figures moved frantically around it, forming a bucket line from a nearby well. Beau assessed the situation quickly as they arrived. The barn was already half consumed, flames licking up the wooden sides and billowing from the hayloft. Livestock had been evacuated to a nearby paddock, but the structure itself was clearly lost. "Focus on keeping it from spreading to the house and outbuildings," Beau ordered his men. "Jim, get that wagon positioned between the barn and house. Matthew, see if they've checked all the stock is out." The next hours passed in a blur of smoke, heat, and exhausting labor. Ruby found herself working alongside women from neighboring homesteads, passing buckets, tending to minor burns, and providing water to the men fighting the fire directly. The acrid smell of smoke filled her nostrils, bringing back vivid memories of her own recent ordeal, but she pushed them aside to focus on the task at hand. Beau seemed to be everywhere at once, directing efforts, hauling water, helping to soak the roof of the threatened house. Ruby caught glimpses of him through the smoke, his face streaked with soot, his shirt clinging to his sweat-soaked body as he worked tirelessly alongside his men. It was nearing dusk when the danger finally passed. The barn was a total loss, but the Carson family home and other buildings had been saved. Exhausted firefighters sat or slumped wherever they could find space, accepting water and thanks from the grateful family. Ruby found Beau sitting on an overturned bucket near the well, his head bowed with fatigue. She filled a dipper with fresh water and brought it to him. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, accepting the water and drinking deeply. "Are you hurt?" Ruby asked, noting an angry red mark on his forearm. Beau glanced at it dismissively. "Just a minor burn. Hazard of the job," Ruby frowned, taking his arm gently to examine the injury. "This needs to be treated. Wait here." She returned moments later with a pot of salve borrowed from Mrs. Carson. Without asking permission, she began to apply it to the burn, her touch gentle but efficient. "You don't have to do this," Beau protested weakly. "Consider it repayment for pulling me from my own fire," Ruby replied, continuing her ministrations. "Besides, infection is nothing to trifle with." Beau watched her work, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. When she finished, he caught her hand briefly. "Thank you." Something in his voice made Ruby look up, meeting his gaze. For a moment they remained thus, connected by more than just the brief touch of hands. Then someone called Beau's name, breaking the moment. "We should head back," he said, rising to his feet. "It'll be full dark soon." The journey back to the ranch was made in weary silence, everyone too exhausted for conversation. Mrs. Abernathy was waiting with hot food when they arrived, fussing over their smoke-stained clothes and minor injuries with maternal concern. After a hasty meal, Ruby excused herself to return to her cabin, desperate for the privacy to process the day's events. The emotional impact of the fire, coming so soon after her own loss, had affected her more deeply than she wanted to admit. She had just lit the lamp when a knock sounded at her door. Opening it, she found Beau standing on the porch, a small bundle in his hands. "I thought you might need these," he said, offering her the package. "Salve for burns and a bottle of Mrs. Abernathy's willow bark tonic. It helps with the aches after a day like today." "Thank you," Ruby said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Would you like to come in, just for a moment?" Beau hesitated, clearly aware of the impropriety, but then nodded. Just for a moment. He stepped inside, removing his hat as he did so. In the small space of the cabin, his presence seemed to fill every corner, making Ruby acutely aware of his height and breadth. "You were impressive today," he said after a brief silence. "Not many would have volunteered to help after what you've been through." Ruby set the package on the table. "It felt right to help. I know what the Carsons are facing." Still, Beau insisted, it showed character, strength. His praise warmed her more than it should have. "I've had to be strong. There hasn't been much choice." "There's always a choice," Beau countered softly. "Many would have given up, gone back east, found an easier path. Is that what you think I should do?" Ruby asked, suddenly needing to know his opinion. Beau shook his head firmly. "No, I think you belong here on your land, building something lasting." The conviction in his voice stirred something deep within her. Even though it would be difficult, rebuilding alone. "Who says you have to be alone?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither was ready to voice. Beau cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "I should go. It's been a long day, and tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Ruby nodded, though part of her wished he would stay, wished they could continue this conversation that seemed to be about much more than just rebuilding a cabin. At the door, Beau paused, turning back to her. "Ruby, whatever you decide about your land, know that you have friends here. People who will help." "I know," she said softly. "Thank you for being one of them." After he left, Ruby stood for a long time looking at the closed door, her thoughts a confusing whirl of gratitude, uncertainty, and a growing feeling she wasn't yet ready to name. Sunday dawned clear and mild, a perfect day for the promised work party at Ruby's property. After a brief service at the small church in Silver Creek, Beau and his men, along with several neighbors who had volunteered their help, made their way to what remained of Ruby's cabin. The scene looked different in the bright light of day than it had immediately after the fire. Nature was already beginning to reclaim the space, with small green shoots pushing through the ash in places. It was a reminder of the resilience of life, something Ruby found oddly comforting. The men set to work immediately, clearing debris and salvaging what could be saved of the stone foundation. Ruby worked alongside them, refusing to be relegated to merely providing refreshments. Her determination earned respectful nods from the men and an approving glance from Beau. By mid-afternoon, the site was cleared, the foundation assessed and deemed sound enough to build upon, and preliminary plans for a new cabin sketched out. Ruby felt a surge of hope as she looked at the cleaned slate where her home would rise again. "We can start on the actual building next week," Jim Hayes told her as they took a break for the food Sarah Wilcox had sent along. "Get the frame up before the weather turns." "I don't know how to thank you all," Ruby said, looking around at the men who had given their day of rest to help her. "No need for thanks," Henry Wilcox assured her. "We all know trouble can come to anyone out here. Today it's your cabin, tomorrow it could be any of ours." As the group ate, the conversation turned to practical matters: lumber needed, tools required, scheduling of work parties. Ruby listened carefully, making mental calculations about costs. Even with volunteer labor, rebuilding would require resources she wasn't sure she had. Beau seemed to read her thoughts. "Don't worry about the lumber," he said quietly as they stood slightly apart from the others. "I have plenty of suitable trees on my land, and the mill owes me a favor." "Beau, I can't keep accepting your charity," Ruby protested. "I already owe you for the clothes and shelter." "It's not charity," he insisted. "It's investment in a neighbor. Besides, you're working hard enough at the ranch to offset any costs." Before Ruby could argue further, a rider approached from the direction of town. As he drew nearer, Ruby recognized Judge Richardson, immaculately dressed despite the dust of the trail. "Well, well," the judge called jovially as he reined his horse to a stop. "Quite the gathering. I heard there might be a work party out this way today." Beau stepped forward, his posture subtly protective as he positioned himself near Ruby. "Judge, what brings you all the way out here?" Richardson dismounted, handing his reins to a nearby youngster with the casual expectation of service that marked his kind. "Just being neighborly, Caldwell. Thought I'd stop by and see how Miss Fletcher is faring after her misfortune." His gaze swept over the cleared foundation and assembled workers. "I see you have plenty of assistants. How fortunate." "People here help their neighbors," Ruby stated, something in the judge's tone raising her hackles. "Indeed they do." Richardson smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Fletcher, might I have a word in private? I have a proposition that might interest you." Ruby hesitated, glancing at Beau, whose expression had hardened at the judge's words. "Anything you wish to say to Miss Fletcher can be said here," Beau suggested, his tone polite but firm. Richardson's smile tightened. "Very well, Miss Fletcher, I understand rebuilding will be an expensive proposition, particularly for someone in your circumstances. I'd like to make you an offer for your property, a generous one that would allow you to start fresh without the burden of reconstruction." A murmur ran through the assembled neighbors. Land sales were always of interest in a community where property determined prosperity. Ruby straightened her spine. "That's very considerate, Judge Richardson. May I ask why you're interested in my humble homestead?" "Let's just say I have plans for development in this area," Richardson replied smoothly. "Your water rights make the property particularly suitable for my needs." "I see." Ruby's tone was neutral. "And what would you consider a generous offer?" Beau shifted beside her, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation but restraining himself from interfering. Richardson named a sum that was indeed substantial enough to buy a small property elsewhere or even return east with a comfortable nest egg. Several of the onlookers murmured in appreciation of the amount. "That's a fair bit of money," Henry Wilcox observed. "It's half what the water rights alone are worth," Beau countered, unable to remain silent any longer. Richardson's expression cooled. "I don't recall asking for your assessment, Caldwell." "Nevertheless, he's right," Ruby said calmly. "My uncle explained the value of those rights to me before he passed. Your offer, while appearing generous, significantly undervalues my property." A flash of annoyance crossed Richardson's face before he masked it with another smile. "Perhaps I've been misinformed about the condition of the water table. I could possibly increase my offer by 10% as a gesture of good faith." "That's still not adequate," Ruby maintained. "But more to the point, Judge Richardson, I'm not interested in selling at any price. This land is my home and I intend to rebuild." Richardson's facade of friendliness dropped entirely. "That would be a mistake, Miss Fletcher. A young woman alone can't manage a property like this, especially starting from nothing. Be sensible, take the money." "I believe Miss Fletcher has made her decision clear," Beau interjected, stepping closer to Ruby. The judge's eyes narrowed as they moved between Ruby and Beau. "I see. Perhaps your friendship with Caldwell here is influencing your judgment, Miss Fletcher. It would be a shame if that temporary arrangement clouded your thinking about your long-term interests." Ruby felt heat rising in her cheeks, but whether from anger at his insinuation or embarrassment, she couldn't say. "My friendship with Mr. Caldwell has nothing to do with my decision. This land was my uncle's legacy to me, and I intend to honor that. Legacies can become burdens, my dear." Richardson's tone was patronizing now. "If you change your mind, and I suspect you will, once the realities of rebuilding set in my offer remains open, for the time being." With that, he remounted his horse, nodded curtly to the assembled group, and rode away, dust rising from his horse's hooves as he departed. A heavy silence fell over the work party. Finally, Jim Hayes spat into the dirt. "Never did like that man, always thinking he can buy whatever he wants." "He usually can," Henry added grimly. "Got half the county in his pocket one way or another." Ruby turned to Beau, finding him watching her with an expression that mingled pride and concern. "Did I make a mistake?" she asked quietly. "Refusing his offer?" "No," Beau said firmly. "You made exactly the right choice. Richardson would have cheated you, and moreover, some things shouldn't be sold at any price." His conviction reassured her, though doubt still lingered. "He won't give up easily, will he?" "No," Beau admitted. "Men like Richardson rarely do." "But you're not alone in this, Ruby. Remember that." The rest of the afternoon passed with renewed purpose, as if Richardson's attempt to buy the property had strengthened everyone's resolve to see it rebuilt. By the time the sun began to set, plans were firmly in place for construction to begin the following weekend. As they rode back to the Caldwell Ranch, Ruby found herself reflecting on the day's events. Richardson's offer had been tempting in its way, an easy solution to her problems, a fresh start without the difficulties of rebuilding. Yet something in her had rebelled at the thought of selling, of giving up what her uncle had entrusted to her. "Penny for your thoughts," Beau said, bringing his horse alongside hers. Ruby glanced at him, struck anew by the solid dependability he represented. "I was thinking about choices, about what makes a place home. And what conclusion did you reach?" "That home isn't just about having a roof over your head," Ruby said slowly. "It's about belonging somewhere, having roots. I've spent most of my life without that, moving from place to place after my parents died. Uncle Joseph's land is the first place that's felt like it could be mine." "I'm not ready to give that up," Beau nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Some things are worth fighting for." "Yes," Ruby agreed softly, "they are." As they approached the ranch, the main house glowing with welcome light in the gathering dusk, Ruby felt a strange doubling of her heart, part of her already thinking of this place as a kind of home, even as she committed to rebuilding her own. It was a confusion of feelings she wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Weekdays were spent at the Caldwell Ranch, where Ruby helped with household tasks and increasingly took on management of the kitchen garden, relieving Mrs. Abernathy of that responsibility. Weekends saw her at her own property, working alongside the volunteers who came faithfully to help with the rebuilding. Progress on the cabin was steady. By the third weekend, the frame was up, and the roof partially completed a larger structure than her original home, with 2 small bedrooms instead of 1, a decision Beau had insisted on when designing the layout. "Room to grow," he had said simply when Ruby questioned the need for the extra space. Throughout this period, Ruby's relationship with Beau evolved in subtle ways. Their conversations grew deeper, touching on hopes and dreams, past disappointments, and future aspirations. She learned about his childhood, his parents' long illness, and the responsibility that had been thrust upon him at a young age. He, in turn, listened as she spoke of her nomadic years after her parents' death, her brief, unhappy stint as a schoolteacher in Ohio, and her uncle's letters that had offered hope of a new beginning in Montana. They were returning from her property one Sunday evening, the early October air carrying the first real hint of the coming winter, when Beau surprised her with a question. "The harvest dance is next Saturday in town. Would you consider attending with me?" Ruby looked at him, startled. They had ridden into Silver Creek together several times for supplies or church, but this was different, a social event, the kind that would be noticed and commented upon by the community. "As friends?" she asked cautiously. Beau met her gaze steadily. "If that's what you prefer to call it." "But my intentions are not merely friendly, Ruby. I think you know that." The frankness of his statement both thrilled and frightened her. Over these weeks, she had become increasingly aware of her feelings for him, feelings that went well beyond gratitude or friendship. But she had been careful to keep them contained, uncertain of his view and conscious of her dependent position. "Beau," she began carefully, "you've done so much for me already. I wouldn't want you to feel obligated in any way." He reined his horse to a stop, prompting Ruby to do the same. His expression was serious as he turned to face her fully. "Listen to me, Ruby Fletcher. There is not a single thing I've done for you that I wouldn't have done for any neighbor in need. My feelings for you have nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with who you are, your courage, your determination, your kindness." His sincerity was unmistakable, written in every line of his face. Ruby felt something tight within her chest begin to loosen. "The dance," Beau continued, "is merely an opportunity for us to spend time together away from work and rebuilding, to see if what I feel, what I hope we both feel, is something worth pursuing." Put that way, it seemed so simple, so reasonable. Yet Ruby knew that accepting his invitation would be a step toward something far more significant than a single evening's entertainment. "People will talk," she said, a last token resistance. Beau's mouth curved in a smile. "People already talk. Let's give them something worth talking about." His smile was infectious, and Ruby found herself returning it. "Very well, Mr. Caldwell, I accept your invitation to the harvest dance." "Good," he said simply, satisfaction evident in his tone as they resumed their journey. As they rode, Ruby realized she was looking forward to the dance with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the event itself and everything to do with the man who had invited her. It was a realization both exhilarating and terrifying. The week leading up to the harvest dance passed in a flurry of activity. Ruby found herself unexpectedly caught up in preparations, with Mrs. Abernathy insisting on altering one of Ruby's new dresses to make it more suitable for a social occasion. "Can't have you looking like you're headed to a barn raising," the older woman declared as she added lace to the collar and cuffs of Ruby's best dress. "Not when you're stepping out with the most eligible bachelor in the county." Ruby blushed at the implication. "It's just a dance, Mrs. Abernathy." The cook snorted in disbelief. "I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Never once has he invited a young lady to a social function. It is most certainly not just a dance." This information gave Ruby pause. She had assumed Beau had a history of courting local young women, given his position and appearance. The idea that she might be the first he had shown serious interest in was both flattering and intimidating. Saturday arrived clear and cool, perfect weather for the harvest celebration. Ruby spent more time than usual on her appearance, arranging her copper hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical braid. The altered dress, a deep green that complemented her eyes, fitted better than before thanks to Mrs. Abernathy's skillful adjustments. When she emerged from her cabin to meet Beau, who had promised to come for her at 4, she was rewarded by the look of frank admiration that crossed his face. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Ruby took in his own appearance, clean-shaven, hair neatly trimmed, wearing a crisp white shirt and dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Caldwell." His smile was warm as he offered his arm. "Shall we?" Rather than riding, Beau had harnessed his best buggy for the occasion, a consideration that touched Ruby deeply. The journey to Silver Creek passed pleasantly, with conversation flowing easily between them as it always seemed to do. The town hall had been transformed for the harvest dance, with autumn leaves and corn shocks decorating the walls and tables laden with food contributed by the community's women. A small band set up on a raised platform was already playing as Beau and Ruby entered. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. Conversations paused momentarily as heads turned to observe them, and Ruby felt the weight of curious stares as Beau led her through the crowd, greeting neighbors and friends as they went. "Ignore them," he murmured close to her ear. "They'll find something else to gossip about soon enough." Ruby did her best to follow his advice, gradually relaxing as the initial scrutiny gave way to the normal flow of the event. She was introduced to dozens of people, most of whom greeted her warmly, expressing sympathy for her loss and interest in the rebuilding progress. "Beau Caldwell, as I live and breathe, you actually came to a social function." A vivacious blonde woman approached them, her pretty face alight with teasing humor. "And with a lady friend, no less. The world must be ending." Beau chuckled, seemingly at ease with the woman's ribbing. "Ruby, this is Clara Wilson, the town's most incorrigible gossip and my childhood tormentor." "Clara, Miss Ruby Fletcher? Pleased to meet you," Clara said, genuine warmth in her voice as she shook Ruby's hand. "Don't believe a word this man says about me. I am a paragon of discretion," Beau snorted. "The day you're discreet, Clara, is the day I'll eat my hat." Clara laughed, unperturbed by his teasing. "Fair enough. Now, Miss Fletcher, you must tell me how you've managed what no other woman has accomplished, getting Beau Caldwell to a dance. I thought he'd rather face a grizzly bear than a ballroom." Ruby smiled, warming to Clara's friendly manner. "I believe it was pity. He felt sorry for the poor homeless woman with nothing to wear." "Ha, I doubt that very much," Clara replied, glancing between them with shrewd assessment. "Well, I won't monopolize you. Plenty of others eager to meet the woman who's captured Beau's interest. But save me a conversation later, Miss Fletcher. I want to hear all about your rebuilding plans." As Clara moved away, Ruby turned to Beau. "Childhood tormentor," he grinned. "Clara's father's ranch borders mine to the south. We grew up together, always competing. She could outride and outshoot most of the boys, myself included, and never let us forget it." "She seems nice," Ruby observed. "Very spirited, she is," Beau agreed. "And a true friend despite the teasing. Her husband's a lucky man." The band struck up a lively tune and Beau offered his hand. "Would you care to dance?" Ruby hesitated only briefly before accepting. "I should warn you, it's been a long time since I've danced. I may be rusty." "That makes two of us," Beau assured her, leading her onto the floor where other couples were already forming sets for a Virginia reel. Any concerns about rustiness proved unfounded as they moved through the dance figures. Beau was a competent partner, his natural grace evident even in the structured movements of the reel. Ruby found herself enjoying the physical activity, the music, and most of all, the repeated moments when the dance brought them together, hands touching, eyes meeting. They danced several more sets before taking a break for refreshments. Beau brought Ruby a cup of punch and a plate of food, finding them a relatively quiet spot near an open window where a cool breeze provided relief from the warmth of the crowded hall. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Very much," Ruby answered honestly. "It's been a long time since I've attended anything like this, not since before my parents died." Beau's expression softened. "I'm glad I could be the one to bring you back to it." They were interrupted by Henry Wilcox, who approached with a concerned expression. "Beau, Ruby, glad I found you. There's something you should know." Beau straightened, instantly alert. "What is it, Henry?" Wilcox lowered his voice. "Richardson's been talking. Making insinuations about Ruby's living arrangement at your ranch, suggesting it's improper." Ruby felt heat rise in her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "That's ridiculous. I have my own cabin, completely separate from the main house." "You and I know that," Henry agreed, "but Richardson's spinning it differently, making it sound like Beau's taking advantage of your situation." Beau's expression darkened dangerously. "Where is he?" Henry placed a restraining hand on Beau's arm. "Now, don't go doing anything rash." "That's probably exactly what he wants, but I thought you should know what's being said." "Thank you for telling us," Ruby said, her stomach knotting with distress. Is he here tonight? No, thankfully, but he's been in town all week talking to anyone who'll listen. Most folks know better than to put stock in his nonsense, but still, gossip spreads. After Henry moved away, Ruby turned to Beau, finding his face still tight with anger. I should never have accepted your offer of shelter, she said quietly. I've put you in an awkward position. No, Beau said firmly. Richardson is the one causing problems, not you, and he's doing it deliberately because you refuse to sell to him. But the damage is done, Ruby insisted. People are talking. Your reputation, my reputation can withstand a bit of gossip, Beau interrupted. I'm more concerned about yours, Ruby bit her lip considering their situation. Perhaps I should move to town. Sarah Wilcox mentioned that the widow Johnson is looking for a boarder. Is that what you want? Beau asked, his tone carefully neutral. No, Ruby admitted softly. But it might be for the best. Beau was silent for a moment, his gaze moving over the crowded hall before returning to her face. There is another solution, he said finally, one that would silence the gossips permanently. Ruby looked at him questioningly. Marry me. The words hung in the air between them, as startling as a thunderclap on a clear day. Ruby stared at him, certain she had misheard. What did you say? She whispered. Beau took her hand, his expression serious. Marry me, Ruby, not just to stop the gossip, though that would be a side benefit. Marry me because I love you, because I think you might love me too. Ruby felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Beau, this is sudden. We've known each other barely 2 months. Some things don't need years to know, he countered. From the moment I carried you out of that burning cabin, something changed for me. Everything I've learned about you since has only confirmed what I felt that night, that you are the woman I want to spend my life with. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Ruby felt her heart responding to it even as her mind cautioned restraint. This is not how I imagined a proposal, she said, a hint of wry humor entering her voice. Beau smiled ruefully. Not how I imagined giving one either. But the sentiment is genuine, even if the timing is imperfect. Ruby took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. Beau, I care for you deeply. These past weeks have been meaningful to me in ways I can't fully express, but marriage is a lifelong commitment. I'm well aware, he assured her. I'm not asking on a whim, Ruby. I've thought about this about us a great deal. As have I, she admitted. But there are practical considerations. My property, for one. I've worked so hard to hold on to it, to rebuild. I can't simply abandon that. I would never ask you to, Beau said immediately. Your land remains yours, regardless of our marital status. But practically speaking, we could combine operations. Your water rights would benefit my cattle, and my resources could help develop your property more quickly. It was a sensible arrangement, one that would benefit them both. Yet Ruby hesitated, something deeper than practicality holding her back. I need time, she said finally. Not to decide if I care for you, I do, more than I perhaps should given our short acquaintance. But to be certain that what I feel is strong enough to build a life upon. Beau nodded, disappointment evident in his eyes, but respect there too. I understand. I won't press you. Just know that the offer stands, and not because of gossip or convenience, but because of what I feel for you. The band began another tune, a slower waltz this time. Beau stood, offering his hand. May I have this dance? Ruby accepted, allowing him to lead her back onto the floor. As they moved together in the intimate 3/4 time, she was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the slight pressure of his fingers against hers, the way his eyes never left her face. Whatever you decide, he said softly as they danced, know that I will support you. If you want to move to town, I'll help you find suitable accommodations. If you want to stay at the ranch, my foreman's cabin is yours for as long as you need it. His selflessness touched her deeply. Thank you for understanding. Always, he promised, and in that single word, Ruby heard a commitment that went beyond their current situation, beyond even the proposal he had just made. It was a promise of constancy, of unwavering support regardless of her decision. As the music swelled around them, Ruby found herself wishing the dance would never end, this moment of perfect understanding between them, uncomplicated by decisions or consequences. But like all such moments, it was fleeting, destined to give way to the reality that waited beyond the dance floor. The remainder of the evening passed in something of a blur for Ruby. She danced with other partners, made conversation with the townspeople who sought her acquaintance, and even found time for the promised chat with Clara Wilson, who proved to be as kind as she was vivacious. But through it all, her mind kept returning to Beau's proposal and the decision that now lay before her. As they rode back to the ranch in the buggy, stars brilliant in the clear October sky above them, Ruby was quiet, lost in thought. Beau respected her silence, offering no pressure, making no attempt to persuade her further. It was only when they reached her cabin that he spoke again. "I meant what I said earlier, Ruby. Whatever you decide about us, I want you to be happy." Ruby looked at him in the moonlight, this man who had saved her life, offered her shelter, and now opened his heart to her. The answer she had been searching for all evening suddenly seemed clear. "Ask me again," she said softly. Beau's breath caught. "What? Your proposal? Ask me again." Ruby's voice was steady now, her decision made. Understanding dawned in Beau's eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he took her hands in his. "Ruby Fletcher, I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Ruby answered simply. "Yes, I will." The joy that transformed Beau's face was like sunrise after the darkest night. He pulled her gently into his arms, and Ruby went willingly, her own happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Ruby nodded, smiling up at him. "I've spent my life searching for home. I think I've finally found it, not in a place, but in a person. In you." Beau's arms tightened around her, and then he was kissing her, a kiss filled with promise and passion and tenderness. Ruby responded in kind, her heart singing with the rightness of their connection. When they finally drew apart, Beau rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably set a date before the gossips have a field day with this development." Ruby laughed softly. "Soon," she agreed. "But not too soon. I'd like to have my cabin finished first." Beau looked surprised. "You still want to complete the rebuilding?" "Of course," Ruby said firmly. "It's my land, my project. I need to see it through." "Besides," she added with a smile, "it will make a fine wedding gift to you, a second home for us, a place we can go when we need time away from the main ranch." "I like the way you think, Miss Fletcher," Beau murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Soon to be Mrs. Caldwell." The name sent a thrill through Ruby. "Mrs. Caldwell," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "It has a nice ring." "It does indeed." Beau kissed her once more, briefly but with feeling, before reluctantly releasing her. "I should let you get some rest. We have a busy day tomorrow, a cabin to finish and a wedding to plan." Ruby nodded, though she was reluctant to end this perfect moment. "Good night, Beau." "Good night, my love," he replied, the endearment falling naturally from his lips as if he had been saying it for years. As Ruby watched him walk back to the main house, her heart full to bursting with newfound joy, she reflected on the strange path that had led her here. A lightning strike that had seemed like the end of her dreams had instead been the beginning of something far more precious. From those flames, a new life had emerged, one filled with promise, love, and the certainty of belonging. The weeks that followed were filled with activity as Ruby balanced wedding preparations with the ongoing work of rebuilding her cabin. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the community, effectively silencing the gossip Richardson had attempted to stir. Instead, the prevailing sentiment was one of approval and even delight that Beau Caldwell had finally found a worthy partner. Ruby was touched by the community's response to their news. Women she barely knew invited her to tea, offered wedding advice, and presented her with small gifts for her future home. Clara Wilson proved especially supportive, becoming a fast friend and staunch ally in navigating the social aspects of joining one of the area's most prominent families. "You've accomplished what half the eligible young ladies in the county have been trying to do for years," Clara teased during one of her visits to the ranch. "Beau's been the most sought-after bachelor since he turned 21. "I wasn't seeking anyone when I came here," Ruby protested. "Least of all a husband." "Which is precisely why you succeeded," Clara replied sagely. "Beau always could spot artifice a mile away. Your genuine nature is what drew him to you." The rebuilding of Ruby's cabin progressed steadily, with more hands joining the effort now that it was understood to be a wedding gift of sorts. By early November, the structure was complete, a sturdy, attractive dwelling with 2 bedrooms, a spacious main room, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. On the day the last shingle was nailed into place, Beau surprised Ruby by presenting her with a carved wooden plaque to hang beside the door. It read simply, "Fletcher Caldwell Homestead," acknowledging both their names and the shared future of the property. "It's perfect," Ruby said, tears welling in her eyes as she traced the carved letters. "Thank you. Thank you," Beau countered, his arm around her shoulders, "for holding on to this place, for seeing its value beyond mere dollars. Our children will thank you too someday." The mention of children brought a blush to Ruby's cheeks and a warmth to her heart. They had set their wedding date for the first weekend in December, just before the worst of winter would make travel difficult for guests coming from a distance. It was to be a simple ceremony in the Silver Creek Church, followed by a celebration at the Caldwell Ranch. As the wedding day approached, Ruby found herself increasingly certain of her decision. The love between her and Beau had deepened with each passing day, built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and genuine admiration. What had begun in crisis, a lightning strike, a burning cabin, a desperate rescue, had blossomed into something enduring and profound. 2 days before the wedding, Ruby was in the main house helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare food for the upcoming celebration when they heard the sound of a wagon approaching. "That'll be the Wilcoxes with your wedding dress," Mrs. Abernathy said, glancing out the window. "Sarah's been keeping it at their place as a surprise." Ruby wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to the door, eager to see the dress that Clara and Sarah had helped her select on a special trip to Fort Benton 3 weeks earlier. But when she stepped onto the porch, it wasn't the Wilcoxes' wagon she saw, but a sleek buggy pulled by a matched pair of black horses. Judge Richardson sat on the driver's seat. Ruby's stomach tightened with apprehension. The judge had been notably absent from town events since the harvest dance, and there had been no further attempts to purchase her land. His appearance now, so close to the wedding, could not be coincidence. "Miss Fletcher," Richardson called, his tone cordial as he brought the buggy to a stop. "Or should I say, the future Mrs. Caldwell, congratulations on your upcoming nuptials." "Thank you," Ruby replied cautiously. "Beau isn't here at the moment. He's checking the north pasture with Jim." "Actually, it's you I came to see," Richardson said, stepping down from the buggy. "Might we speak privately?" Ruby hesitated, reluctant to be alone with the judge but not wanting to appear rude. "We can talk on the porch," she suggested, a compromise that would keep them in view of the house while still offering some privacy. Richardson nodded, mounting the steps to join her. "I understand your cabin has been rebuilt. I rode by yesterday, fine workmanship. Caldwell spared no expense, it seems." "Many hands contributed," Ruby corrected. "The community has been very supportive, indeed." Richardson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Small communities often rally around one of their own, which brings me to the purpose of my visit." Ruby waited, tension building in her shoulders. "I've received some concerning information," Richardson continued, lowering his voice. "Information that suggests your uncle's claim to the water rights on your property might not be as secure as previously believed." Ruby's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about? My uncle's rights were properly filed and recorded." "So it appeared," Richardson agreed. "But my investigation has uncovered some irregularities in the original filing, technical issues that could potentially invalidate the claim." The implication was clear, and Ruby felt anger rising to replace her initial anxiety. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to intimidate me because I refuse to sell." "Not at all," Richardson protested, his expression a mask of concern. "I'm simply bringing this to your attention as a courtesy. Water rights disputes can be messy, expensive affairs. As a soon-to-be married woman, I thought you might prefer to resolve this quietly, without legal entanglements that could cast a shadow over your new life." "By selling to you," Ruby concluded flatly, Richardson spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. It would be the simplest solution. My offer still stands the same generous sum I proposed earlier. You and Caldwell could start your marriage without this complication. Ruby studied the judge, seeing clearly now the calculation behind his pleasant facade. If there were truly issues with the water rights, why bring this up now, just before my wedding? Why not months ago when I first refused your offer? A flicker of irritation crossed Richardson's face before he controlled it. The investigation took time. And frankly, I had hoped you might reconsider on your own once the practical challenges of rebuilding became apparent. Well, as you can see, those challenges have been met, Ruby replied, gesturing toward the distant view of her completed cabin. With help from friends and neighbors who understand the value of community over profit, Richardson's mask of civility slipped further. Don't be naive, Miss Fletcher. Sentimentality has no place in business decisions. Those water rights are worth far more than the land itself, and eventually they will be properly developed whether by you or someone else. If you're so certain of legal issues with the claim, why not simply challenge it in court? Ruby countered, suspicion growing. Why offer to buy rights you believe may be invalid? The question clearly caught Richardson off guard. He recovered quickly, but not before Ruby glimpsed something like concern in his expression. Court challenges are time-consuming and costly for all involved, he said dismissively. I merely wish to spare you that ordeal. How considerate, Ruby remarked, her voice cool, but unnecessary. My uncle's claim is solid, as I believe you well know. This is nothing but an attempt to pressure me into selling before my marriage gives me an even stronger position. Richardson's pretense of friendliness vanished entirely. You're making a mistake, Miss Fletcher. Those rights will be contested one way or another. Better to take the money now while the offer still stands. The answer is still no, Ruby stated firmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have wedding preparations to attend to. For a moment, she thought Richardson might continue to argue. Instead, he gave her a cold smile. Very well, don't say I didn't warn you. Marriage to Caldwell may bring certain advantages, but it also aligns you against powerful interests in this territory. I hope you're prepared for the consequences. With that thinly veiled threat, he descended the porch steps and returned to his buggy. Ruby watched him drive away, her hands trembling slightly with the aftermath of anger and worry. Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway behind her. What did that snake want? She demanded, having clearly observed enough of the interaction to form an opinion. To try one last time to intimidate me into selling, Ruby replied, turning to the older woman. He claims there might be problems with the water rights. Hogwash, Mrs. Abernathy snorted. Joseph Fletcher's claim is as solid as they come. Richardson's just hoping to scare you because you're a woman alone. She paused, correcting herself with a small smile. Or at least you were, not anymore. No, Ruby agreed, feeling calmer as the truth of those words sank in. Not anymore. When Beau returned later that afternoon and heard about Richardson's visit, his reaction was predictably protective and angry. The nerve of that man, he fumed, pacing the kitchen where Ruby recounted the conversation. Coming here, threatening you days before our wedding. It wasn't exactly a threat, Ruby pointed out, more of an insinuation. It was a threat, Beau insisted, veiled in legal language. Richardson knows those water rights are valid. He's just hoping to create doubt to make you question your position. Ruby nodded, having reached the same conclusion. What I don't understand is why he's so fixated on my property specifically. There must be other water rights in the county he could pursue. Beau's expression was grim. It's not just about the water, it's about control. Richardson has been systematically acquiring property throughout the territory, particularly land with good water access. If he controls enough of the water, he controls the future development of the entire region. And my uncle's claim stands in the way of that plan, Ruby realized. Exactly. With your water rights and mine combined, we represent a significant obstacle to his ambitions. Beau stopped pacing and took Ruby's hands in his. I'm sorry you had to face him alone. I should have been here. I handled it, Ruby reminded him, a hint of pride in her voice. And I'll handle it again if necessary. We both will together. Beau's expression softened as he looked down at her. Together, he agreed. That's what marriage means, facing challenges as one. The sincerity in his voice warmed Ruby to her core. 3 more days, she said softly. 3 more days, Beau repeated, bringing her hands to his lips. And then no one, not Richardson, not anyone, will ever come between us again. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the first real snow of the season having fallen during the night to blanket the landscape in pristine white. Ruby woke early in the Wilcox home, where she had spent the night in accordance with tradition that the bride and groom should not see each other on their wedding day until the ceremony. Sarah Wilcox bustled about, helping Ruby prepare while reminiscing about her own wedding day nearly 30 years earlier. Clara Wilson arrived mid-morning, bringing with her Ruby's wedding dress, carefully preserved from wrinkles during its journey from town. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered," Ruby breathed as Clara carefully laid out the gown on the bed. It was a simple dress by Eastern standards, but finer than anything Ruby had ever owned, ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, and tiny pearl buttons down the back. The clean lines suited Ruby's slender figure, and the color complemented her fair complexion and copper hair. "Beau won't know what hit him," Clara predicted with a grin as she helped Ruby into the dress. "He'll be speechless." The journey to the church was made in the Wilcox's best wagon, decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbon for the occasion. Ruby sat between Sarah and Clara, a knot of nervous excitement growing in her stomach as they approached Silver Creek. The small church was filled to capacity when they arrived, with guests spilling out onto the steps despite the cold. Word had spread throughout the county about Beau Caldwell's wedding to the young woman he had rescued from a burning cabin, and it seemed everyone wanted to witness the culmination of what many considered a romantic tale worthy of a novel. Ruby waited in a small anteroom while the guests settled and the final preparations were made. Henry Wilcox, who had agreed to give her away in the absence of any male relatives, stood by the door, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best but determined to do his duty properly. "Beau's a good man," he told Ruby as they waited for their cue. "Known him since he was a boy, never seen him as happy as he's been these past months with you." "Thank you, Henry," Ruby said, touched by his words, "for everything you and Sarah have done." Henry shuffled his feet, embarrassed by her gratitude. "Just being neighborly, that's all." The organ began to play, signaling it was time. Henry offered his arm, and Ruby took a deep breath, steadying her nerves before placing her hand on his sleeve. The church fell silent as they entered, all heads turning to watch Ruby's progress up the aisle. But Ruby saw only one person, Beau, standing tall and handsome at the altar, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of such love and wonder that it brought tears to her own. Time seemed to slow as she walked toward him, each step bringing her closer to a future she had never imagined for herself, but now embraced with her whole heart. When Henry placed her hand in Beau's, the warmth of his grip anchored her, making the moment real. "You're beautiful," Beau whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The ceremony itself passed in something of a blur for Ruby. She was aware of the pastor's words, of the responses she and Beau gave, of the cool metal of the ring being slipped onto her finger. But mostly she was aware of Beau beside her, his presence solid and reassuring, his voice steady as he spoke his vows. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the pastor declared finally. "You may kiss the bride." Beau's kiss was gentle but held a promise of deeper passion to come. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell for the first time, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration at the Caldwell Ranch afterward was everything a Western wedding party should be: abundant food, music for dancing, and enough whiskey to keep spirits high well into the evening. Mrs. Abernathy had outdone herself with the preparations, and the ranch house had never looked more festive, decorated with evergreens, holly, and ribbons that reflected the approaching Christmas season. Ruby moved through the crowd of well-wishers, accepting congratulations and introductions to distant neighbors and Beau's business associates who had traveled for the occasion. She was struck by the genuine warmth of the community, by how completely they had accepted her as one of their own in the short time she had been among them. As the celebration continued, Beau found her near the punch bowl, slipping an arm around her waist with the easy familiarity of a husband. "Happy?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "Very," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though a little overwhelmed, I've never been the center of so much attention." "You deserve every bit of it," Beau said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And more." They were interrupted by Jim Hayes, who approached with an apologetic expression. "Sorry to bother you, boss, but there's someone here to see you. Says it's important." Beau frowned. "Who is it?" "Thomas Reynolds, Judge Richardson's clerk," Jim replied. "He's waiting on the porch." Ruby felt Beau tense beside her. "Today of all days," he muttered. "Tell him I'm busy celebrating my wedding." "I did," Jim assured him. "He insisted, said it concerns both you and Mrs. Caldwell and it can't wait." Beau and Ruby exchanged a look of concern. "We'd better see what this is about," Ruby said quietly. Together they made their way to the porch, where a thin, nervous-looking young man stood clutching a leather portfolio. "Mr. Reynolds," Beau greeted him coolly. "This is an unexpected intrusion on our wedding day." "I apologize for the timing, Mr. Caldwell, Mrs. Caldwell," Reynolds replied, his voice betraying his anxiety. "But after what happened this morning, I felt I had to come immediately." "What happened this morning?" Ruby asked, a sense of foreboding growing. Reynolds glanced over his shoulder, as if afraid of being overheard. "Judge Richardson filed a formal challenge to your water rights claim, Mrs. Caldwell. He's claiming that the original survey was flawed and that the water on your property actually originates on land he recently acquired." "That's absurd," Beau said sharply. "The Fletcher claim has been established for years. The water source is clearly within the property boundaries." "I know," Reynolds agreed, surprising them both. "That's why I'm here." The judge, he altered documents, changed the survey maps to support his claim. Ruby gasped. "You're saying he committed fraud?" Reynolds nodded miserably. "It's not the first time. He's been manipulating land records for years, but no one's been willing to speak against him. He has too much power in the territory." "Then why are you here now?" Beau asked, suspicion evident in his tone. "Because this time I have proof." Reynolds opened his portfolio and extracted several documents. "These are the original survey maps for the Fletcher property, showing the true water source location. And these," he produced another set of papers, "are the altered versions the judge filed with his challenge." Beau took the documents, examining them carefully. "The differences are subtle but significant," he observed. "He's moved the boundary markers just enough to place the spring on what he claims is his land." "Exactly," Reynolds confirmed. "He's been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment. And you've been helping him," Ruby stated, more observation than accusation. The clerk flushed with shame. "Yes, I'm not proud of it, but when I saw how far he was willing to go this time, targeting a newly married couple on their wedding day, it was too much." "Why come to us instead of the authorities?" Beau asked. "Because the territorial judge is Richardson's brother-in-law," Reynolds explained. "Any legal challenge would be heard by him. It would be your word against Richardson's and without evidence." "Which is where these original documents come in," Beau concluded, understanding dawning. "With these, we can prove the alterations." "Yes," Reynolds agreed, "but you'll need more than just the territorial courts. You'll need to take this to the federal level where Richardson has less influence." Ruby looked at the clerk with newfound respect. "You're risking a great deal by helping us." Reynolds nodded grimly. "My position, certainly, possibly more. Richardson doesn't forgive betrayal." Beau studied the young man thoughtfully. "Why now? You said yourself he's been doing this for years. What changed?" Reynolds hesitated, then answered quietly. "My father was Joseph Fletcher's friend. When I learned the judge was targeting his niece's property specifically, using methods that went beyond his usual manipulations, I couldn't be part of it anymore." The personal connection surprised Ruby. "You knew my uncle?" "Not well," Reynolds admitted, "but I knew of his reputation. He was an honest man who earned what he had through hard work, not manipulation. He didn't deserve to have his legacy stolen through fraud." Beau placed a hand on Reynolds' shoulder. You've done the right thing coming to us, and you have my word that we'll protect you as much as we can from the consequences." The clerk looked relieved but still anxious. "I should go. If the judge discovers these documents are missing or that I've been here." "Of course," Ruby agreed. "But Mr. Reynolds, if you ever need help or a position away from the judge's influence, you'll find friends at the Caldwell Ranch." Gratitude flashed across the young man's face. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell, and congratulations on your marriage. I truly am sorry to have intruded on your celebration." After Reynolds departed, Beau and Ruby remained on the porch, the documents in hand, both processing what they had just learned. "He targeted us deliberately," Ruby said finally, "on our wedding day." "A calculated move," Beau agreed. "He assumed we'd be distracted by the celebration, that we wouldn't mount an immediate defense. But thanks to Mr. Reynolds, we can." Ruby's voice strengthened with determination. "We can fight this, Beau. We have the evidence." Beau looked down at his bride, admiration in his eyes. "Most women would be upset to have their wedding day interrupted by such news." Ruby smiled wryly. "I'm not most women. Besides, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing we can defeat him at his own game." "That's my girl," Beau said proudly, pulling her into a quick embrace. "Richardson has no idea what he's up against." They agreed to keep the matter private for now, not wanting to cast a shadow over their wedding celebration. Beau secured the documents in his study before they rejoined their guests, presenting a united front of newlywed happiness that was, despite the concerning news, entirely genuine. As the evening wore on and guests began to depart, Ruby found herself increasingly aware that another threshold awaited the transition from public celebration to private intimacy as husband and wife. A mixture of anticipation and nervousness fluttered in her stomach each time she caught Beau's gaze across the room, reading in his eyes a matching awareness. Finally, as the last guests made their way to waiting wagons and horses, Beau approached Ruby where she stood by the fireplace, bidding farewell to Clara and her husband. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly, offering his arm. The simple question held layers of meaning, and Ruby felt a blush rise to her cheeks as she placed her hand on his sleeve. "Yes," she answered just as simply. They had decided to spend their wedding night at Ruby's rebuilt cabin rather than in the main house, a choice that offered privacy while honoring the significance of the property to their relationship. As they rode through the moonlit night, snow crunching beneath their horses' hooves, Ruby felt a profound sense of rightness, of coming full circle from the night Beau had carried her from flames to safety. The cabin glowed with welcome as they approached, lamplight spilling from windows that misses. Abernathy had thoughtfully lit before departing the celebration early to prepare the place for them. Inside, a fire burned in the hearth, and fresh flowers, a luxury in December, brightened the table. Beau lifted Ruby from her horse and carried her across the threshold, a traditional gesture that made her laugh with delight despite its predictability. "Welcome home, Mrs. Caldwell," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the center of the main room. Ruby looked around at the cabin, her vision brought to life through community effort, now to be shared with the man she loved. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Everything I hoped for." Beau moved to stand behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "The first of many dreams we'll build together," he promised, his voice low near her ear. Ruby turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, this man who had become, in a few short months, the center of her world. "I love you," she said simply, "more than I thought possible when we first met." "And I love you," Beau replied, his eyes darkening as he drew her closer. "More with each passing day." His kiss was different from those they had shared before, deeper, less restrained, a promise fulfilled rather than merely offered. Ruby responded in kind, her initial shyness giving way to the certainty of being exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the man who had carried her through flames to safety and into a life richer than she had ever dared to dream. Later, as they lay entwined beneath quilts in the bedroom of the cabin they had built together, Beau's fingers traced lazy patterns on Ruby's bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noting the contemplative look on her face. Ruby smiled, nestling closer to his warmth. "I was thinking about lightning," she admitted. "How something so destructive could lead to something so beautiful." Beau's arm tightened around her. "Nature's way of clearing out the old to make way for the new," he quoted his earlier words back to her. "Though I'm grateful you weren't part of what was cleared away." "Thanks to you," Ruby murmured, pressing a kiss to his chest above his heart. "We saved each other," Beau corrected gently. "You brought light back into my life just as surely as I carried you from that burning cabin." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the window to join those already blanketing the landscape. But inside the cabin, warmth reigned, the warmth of the fire, the warmth of new love, and the warmth of a future being written together, word by word, day by day. From the ashes of Ruby's former life, something stronger had emerged, a partnership forged in crisis, tempered by challenge, and destined to weather whatever storms might come their way. It was not the life she had envisioned when she inherited her uncle's modest homestead. But as she drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, Ruby knew with absolute certainty that it was the life she was meant to live. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising to the lives of Beau and Ruby Caldwell. Their combined properties flourished under their joint management, with Ruby's water rights indeed proving invaluable to the expanding cattle operation. The fraudulent claims Richardson had attempted to file were exposed and dismissed, thanks to Thomas Reynolds' evidence and testimony before a federal land commissioner. The aftermath had been significant for all involved. Richardson, his corrupt practices finally brought to light, had been forced to resign his judgeship and had left the territory in disgrace. Reynolds, true to Ruby and Beau's promise of protection, had found employment as the Caldwell Ranch's bookkeeper, his meticulous attention to detail making him an invaluable addition to their growing enterprise. Most significant of all changes, however, was the expansion of the Caldwell family itself. In the spring of 1878, Ruby had given birth to their first child, a daughter they named Sarah, after Sarah Wilcox, who had been such a steadfast friend. 2 years later, a son joined the family, named Joseph in honor of Ruby's uncle, whose legacy had brought her to Montana in the first place. On a warm summer evening in 1881, Ruby sat on the porch of her cabin, now expanded to accommodate their growing family, watching as Beau played with their children in the yard. Sarah, at 3, was a spirited girl with her mother's copper hair and her father's blue eyes. Little Joseph, just turned 1, toddled after his sister with determined concentration, his chubby legs still unsteady but his determination unwavering. The sight filled Ruby's heart with a contentment she had never imagined possible in those dark days after losing her first home. Beau caught her watching and smiled, the same smile that still had the power to quicken her pulse after 5 years of marriage. "What are you thinking, love?" he asked, coming to sit beside her on the porch steps, lifting Joseph onto his lap as he did so. "I was thinking about how full my life is," Ruby replied, reaching out to smooth their son's dark hair. "How rich in all the ways that truly matter," Beau nodded, understanding as he always did. Not a bad outcome for a woman who once lost everything in a lightning strike. "Not everything," Ruby corrected gently. "I still had myself, my land, and as it turned out, a very convenient cowboy who happened to be passing by at just the right moment." Beau laughed, the sound still one of Ruby's favorite things in the world. Convenient was I. "And here I thought I was being heroic." "That too," Ruby conceded with a smile. "My hero then and now." Sarah, overhearing this exchange, came running to join them on the steps. "Tell the story, Mama," she begged. "Tell about the lightning and the fire and how Papa saved you." It was a familiar request, one that had become something of a bedtime ritual in their household. Ruby exchanged an amused glance with Beau before gathering her daughter close. "Well, it was a dark and stormy night," she began, using the traditional opening that always made Sarah giggle. "The worst storm Montana had seen in years. Lightning flashed across the sky like angry fingers reaching for the earth." As Ruby recounted their story, somewhat sanitized for young ears, but true in all the important details, Beau listened with the same rapt attention he always gave when she spoke. His hand found hers between them on the step, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of long partnership. "And then Papa carried Mama through the flames to safety," Sarah prompted when Ruby paused. "That's right," Ruby confirmed. "He was very brave." "And then you fell in love and got married and had me and Joseph," Sarah concluded triumphantly, having heard the story often enough to know its progression. "Eventually," Beau amended, his eyes twinkling as they met Ruby's. "It took a little time for your mama to realize how charming I was." Ruby laughed. "Not that long," she corrected. "Some things you just know, even in the middle of a crisis." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard of the place where their story had begun, Ruby reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From strangers thrust together by disaster to partners sharing a life built on love, respect, and mutual support, they had traveled a path neither could have anticipated but both now treasured. The cabin that lightning had destroyed and community had rebuilt stood as a symbol of their story, a testament to resilience, to the power of helping hands, and to the truth that sometimes, from the darkest moments of loss, can emerge the brightest beginnings of love. As the family gathered to head back to the main house for the night, Ruby cast one last glance at the cabin illuminated by the setting sun. Lightning had struck her roof, and a cowboy had carried her through flames to safety. But what neither of them had known that stormy night was that in saving her life, he had also given her a future brighter than either could have imagined a future. They continued to build together, day by day, year by year, with love as their foundation and family as their greatest achievement.